The town of Dust Hollow squatted on the edge of nowhere like a dying thing, its weathered buildings leaning against each other for support against the endless wind. Red dust coated everything: the warped boardwalks, the chapel's crooked cross, the faces of folk who'd long since given up washing it away. In this place where hope came to die, judgment flourished like desert thorns, sharp and unforgiving. Clara Whitmore lived where the town ended and the wasteland began, in a house that folks said matched its owner, broken but still standing. From her front porch, she could see the whole of Dust Hollow spread below, though few in town ever looked back up the hill at her. The path to her door had grown wild with disuse, save for the narrow track her own feet had worn through the scrub grass. She moved carefully that morning, favoring her right leg as she always did since the night her husband died. The limp was worse when storms approached, and she could smell rain on the wind despite the cloudless sky. Her hands, once smooth as any lady's, now bore the calluses of a woman who chopped her own wood and hauled her own water. At 32, she looked older, though her green eyes still held a stubborn light that no amount of grief had managed to extinguish. Inside the small house, everything spoke of careful order. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, things her grandmother had taught her before the world went dark. A half-finished dress lay folded on her sewing table, tiny stitches marking hours of work by lamplight. This one was for the Henley girl, whose family couldn't afford new clothes, but whose mother still slipped Clara $1 here and there, always after dark, always with worried glances over her shoulder. Clara's fingers traced the delicate embroidery she'd added to the collar. Wildflowers that would never wilt. Beauty that would last even in this unforgiving place. It was more than the dress warranted, more than she was paid for. But Clara couldn't help herself. If she could give a child one beautiful thing in this harsh world, she would. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. She tended her small garden where precious vegetables struggled against the alkaline soil. She checked her stores of medicine, making note of what grew low. When the sun reached its peak, she retreated inside to work on the dress, her needle moving in steady, soothing strokes. It was past 3 when she heard it, a low rumble like distant thunder, though the sky remained stubbornly clear. Clara set aside her sewing and limped to the window. On the horizon, a wall of brown rose from the earth to the sky, rolling toward Dust Hollow with terrible purpose. Dust storm, a bad one. She'd seen enough of them to know this would be no ordinary blow, already. She could hear the town bell clanging its warning. Folks would be battening down, stuffing rags under doors, bringing livestock into whatever shelter they could find. Clara moved as quickly as her leg allowed, securing shutters and checking the oilcloth over her medicinal stores. She was reaching for the last shutter when she saw him, a lone figure leading a limping horse down the main road. The storm was maybe 20 minutes out, and any fool could see he'd never make it to proper shelter. The man moved like he was hurt, or exhausted, or both. His hat was pulled low, his duster whipping around his legs. Clara watched him stop at the boarding house, saw Mrs. Carey's pinched face appear at the door only to shake her head and slam it shut. The saloon's doors were already barred. Even the church, Clara's mouth twisted bitterly. Even the church had locked its doors against the stranger. She should do the same. Should mind her own business like she'd learned to do these past 3 years. A woman alone, especially a woman like her, couldn't afford to take chances. But her hands were already reaching for her shawl, her feet already moving toward the door. The wind hit her like a physical thing when she stepped outside. The stranger had made it another block before stopping, clearly at a loss. His horse's head hung low, one front leg held carefully off the ground. Clara could see the resignation in the man's shoulders, the way he was already looking for whatever poor shelter he might find. An alley between buildings, maybe, or an overturned wagon. "You there?" Her voice barely carried over the rising wind. "Mister," he turned, and she caught a glimpse of a face marked by sun and hard living. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, pale against weathered skin. His eyes, gray as the coming storm, widened slightly at the sight of her. Clara gestured urgently toward her house. "Storm's coming fast. I've got shelter." He hesitated, glancing between her and the wall of dust bearing down on them. She could see him taking in her limp, her modest dress, the lack of any man's presence. A woman alone, offering shelter to a stranger. He knew as well as she did what the town would say. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but you'll die out here," Clara said flatly. "Your horse too. I've got a lean-to out back that'll hold him, and a roof that'll hold us, unless you'd prefer to choke on dust to preserve my reputation, which I assure you is already past saving." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He nodded once, decisively. "Name's Wyatt Coulter. I'm obliged to you, ma'am." "Clara Whitmore. Now hurry." They worked together in efficient silence. Getting the horse, a bay mare with intelligent eyes, settled in the shelter behind Clara's house. Wyatt's hands were gentle as he checked the mare's injured leg, and Clara found herself noting the care he took, the quiet way he spoke to calm the animal. By the time they stumbled through Clara's front door, the storm was upon them, turning day to twilight. Clara lit lamps while Wyatt secured the door. Wedging a rolled blanket against the gap at the bottom, dust still found its way in, as it always did. But the house would hold. It had weathered worse storms than this, just as she had. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair by the stove. "You're favoring your right side, ribs?" Wyatt's eyebrows rose slightly. "Horse rolled on me 2 days back. Didn't think it showed. I've had practice noticing such things." Clara moved to her medicine shelf, selecting a jar. "This'll help with the pain, if you'll trust a stranger's remedies. Seems you're not a stranger anymore. Mrs. Whitmore, and I'd be grateful." Mrs. Whitmore. He'd noticed her wedding ring, then the simple band she still couldn't bring herself to remove. Clara mixed the powder into water, handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she pulled back as if burned. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken questions. Clara busied herself with small tasks, checking the shutters, adjusting the lamp wicks, anything to avoid the strange intimacy of sharing space with another person. It had been so long since anyone had sat at her table, drunk from her cups. "Thank you," Wyatt said finally. "Not many folks would have done what you did. Not many folks get the chance. This town doesn't look kindly on strangers." She paused, added quietly, "Or on those who help them." "Yet you did." Clara shrugged, a gesture that tried for indifference and failed. "I've found that when you've already fallen from grace, you might as well do as your conscience dictates. Coffee? If it's no trouble." She set the pot on the stove, movements careful and precise. Everything she did these days was careful, considered. One misstep, one more piece of gossip, and even the few who still dealt with her might turn away. But what was harboring a stranger compared to what they already whispered about her? "Your horse," she said, needing conversation to fill the space. "She's a fine animal, well-trained. Belle's gotten me out of more trouble than I care to count, saved my life more than once." Wyatt shifted in his chair, winced. "Though she couldn't save me from my own foolishness with that creek crossing. Swollen from the mountain snowmelt. You know it? My husband used to—" Clara stopped, turned away. "It's a dangerous crossing in spring. You're lucky it was just ribs." She felt rather than saw him studying her. Most men would have pressed, would have asked about the husband, about why a woman her age was alone. Wyatt Coulter simply nodded and let the silence be. The coffee boiled. Clara poured 2 cups, added a precious bit of sugar to each. When she handed Wyatt his cup, she noticed his hands, scarred but clean, nails trimmed neat, a man who took care with things. Then she found herself wondering what had driven him to Dust Hollow. What business could possibly bring anyone to this forgotten corner of creation? "If you don't mind my asking," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "What keeps you here? Town doesn't seem the welcoming sort." Clara sat across from him, her own coffee warming her hands. Through the walls, she could hear the storm's fury, feel the house shudder but hold. Like her, she thought, battered but not broken. "This is home," she said simply. "My mother was born here. My grandmother, too. That house down there, the one with the blue door, that's where I grew up. The cemetery on the hill holds 4 generations of my family." She took a sip of coffee, choosing her words. "Just because the living have turned cold doesn't mean I'll abandon the dead." Wyatt nodded slowly. "Roots," he said. "I understand roots." "Do you have any roots, I mean?" "Had ranch up in Montana, family land going back 50 years. His jaw tightened. Lost it last winter. Banknote came due, and cattle prices being what they were. I'm sorry." He shrugged, the gesture sharp with lingering anger. "Not your fault. Not anyone's fault. Maybe, except mine for thinking the world owed me permanence." He met her eyes. "So now I drift. Pick up work where I can find it. Keep moving south. Heard there might be ranch work near the border. Through Dust Hollow." A wry smile touched his lips. "Map made it look like a shortcut. Map didn't mention the hospitality." Despite herself, Clara smiled. It felt strange on her face. Unused muscles remembering their purpose. "Oh, we're famous for that." "Why, just last month, we ran off a traveling preacher for suggesting folks should practice Christian charity. Can't have that sort of radical thinking here." Wyatt's laugh was rich, unexpected. It filled the small room, pushed back against the storm's rage. Clara found herself laughing too, and for a moment, just a moment, she forgot to be careful. The wind chose that moment to slam something against the house, a loose board, maybe, or a piece of someone's fence. Both of them startled, and Clara's hand knocked against her coffee cup, sending it rolling. She lunged for it, forgetting her bad leg, and stumbled. Wyatt moved fast for a man with injured ribs. His hands caught her arms, steadied her, held her until she found her balance. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, close enough that she could smell the trail dust on him, see the flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling away. "I'm not usually so. No harm done." His voice was carefully neutral, but she'd seen something flicker across his face. Not pity. She'd learned to recognize pity in all its forms. This was something else, something that made her wrap her arms around herself. "The storm won't last forever," she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. "Few hours, maybe. You can bed down here by the stove. I'll fetch blankets. Mrs. Whitmore, please." She held up a hand. "You're welcome here, Mr. Coulter, but don't mistake necessity for anything else. We both know what this town would say about a widow woman sheltering a man. I'm doing what's right because it needs doing, nothing more." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood. And I'm grateful, ma'am. More than you know." Clara retreated to the back room, leaning against the door once it closed behind her. Her heart was racing like she'd run a mile, her skin still warm where he'd touched her. 3 years. 3 years since anyone had touched her with gentleness, and her body betrayed her by remembering what that felt like. Through the thin door, she heard Wyatt settling himself by the stove, the creak of floorboards under his weight, a stranger in her house, a man with careful hands and kind eyes, who laughed at her bitter jokes and didn't ask questions she couldn't answer. Tomorrow, the town would know. They always knew, and the whispers would start again. The eyes that followed her would grow harder. But tonight, while the storm raged and the world shrunk to these 4 walls, Clara Whitmore allowed herself one moment of not caring. She gathered blankets from her cedar chest, paused at the small mirror hanging by her bed. The woman looking back at her was thin, worn, marked by grief and hardship. But in her eyes, those green eyes her husband had once praised, then cursed, she saw something she'd thought dead. Not hope. She wouldn't call it hope. But perhaps, just perhaps, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself, a place where something might, someday, take root and grow. The storm howled on, And Clara returned to her unexpected guest with blankets and the strange, terrifying feeling that her carefully ordered world had just shifted on its foundations. The storm broke near dawn, leaving Dust Hollow scrubbed raw and gasping under a sky gone pale as old bones. Clara woke to silence so complete it felt like another kind of noise, and for a moment couldn't remember why her back ached from sleeping in her bedroom chair. Then she heard it, the rhythmic scratch of a broom on wood. She limped to the main room to find Wyatt Coulter sweeping dust from her floorboards, moving carefully around her few pieces of furniture. He'd already rekindled the stove and set coffee to boil. "You didn't need to do that," Clara said, pulling her shawl tighter. Wyatt straightened, wincing slightly. The morning light through her clean windows showed him clearer than lamplight had. The deep lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to pain. "Seemed the least I could do. Ma'am, you've got enough work without cleaning up after the storm." She wanted to protest, to maintain the careful distance she'd insisted on, but the sight of someone else tending her house, such a small thing, yet it threatened to undo her. How long since anyone had lifted a finger to help her? Even before James died, he'd never. "Thank you," she managed. "How are your ribs?" "Better. That medicine of yours works wonders." He leaned the broom against the wall. "I should check on Belle, then be on my way. You've been more than kind, but I won't impose further." The relief Clara expected to feel didn't come. Instead, something like disappointment flickered through her chest. "Your horse needs rest," she heard herself say. "That leg won't bear hard travel for days yet. I'll manage, always do." "By killing her?" The words came sharp. "By pushing until she goes lame permanent? I may not know much about drifting, Mr. Coulter, but I know horses, and that mare deserves better than a man's stubborn pride." His face went still, and she thought she'd crossed a line. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "You sound like my sister. She never let me get away with foolishness either. Your sister sounds like a sensible woman." She was. The smile faded. Fever took her 5 winters back, her and her little ones. Part of why I couldn't hold the ranch, I suppose. Too many ghosts. Clara's hand moved without her permission, almost touching his arm before she caught herself. "I'm sorry. The fever took many that year. We lost half the children in town. You help with the doctoring here?" She turned away, busying herself with cups. "When they let me, which isn't often these days." Through the window, she could see folks emerging from their houses, assessing storm damage. Soon enough, someone would notice Wyatt's horse in her lean-to, put together the stranger who'd sought shelter and the widow who'd provided it. The arithmetic of small-town gossip was ruthlessly simple. "I know what you're risking," Wyatt said quietly. "Having me here. If there's somewhere else I can take Belle." "There isn't." Clara set his coffee down harder than necessary. "And I knew the risk when I called to you. I'm not some simpering girl who acts without thinking. Mr. Coulter, stay until your horse is sound. Let them talk." He studied her with those storm-gray eyes. Why? Such a simple question. Why had she called out? Why did she want him to stay? Clara gripped her cup until her knuckles whitened. Because once you start living by their rules, you're not living at all, just existing. They drank coffee in silence, but it was different from the night before. Something had shifted with the dawn. Some barrier thinned. When Wyatt rose to tend his horse, Clara found herself following. Belle nickered softly as they approached. In daylight, Clara could see she was a quality animal, with the lines that spoke of careful breeding. Wyatt ran his hands down the injured leg, checking for heat and swelling. "She's better," he said, relief clear in his voice. "You were right about needing rest, though. I usually am about such things." Clara reached out tentatively, let Belle lip at her palm. "She's beautiful. Must have cost dear. Last thing I sold before losing the ranch." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the pain underneath. Couldn't let her go. Man needs something in this world that's his. Clara understood that, After James died, she'd sold nearly everything, his guns, his saddle, even her mother's silver. But her grandmother's medical books, her sewing box, the rocking chair her father made, those she'd kept, even when money was desperate tight. "I have grain," she offered. "Not much, but enough to see her fed proper while you're here. I'll pay. You'll do no such thing." She straightened, met his eyes. "You'll help with chores to keep your hands busy, because I know the kind of man who goes half mad with idleness. But you won't pay for basic kindness. I won't have it." That smile again, quick and surprising. "Yes, ma'am." They worked through the morning in companionable quiet. Wyatt split wood while Clara tended her garden, coaxing life from soil that wanted only to give death. He repaired a broken shutter. She mended a shirt he bashfully produced from his saddlebags. The domesticity of it should have felt wrong, dangerous instead. It felt like drinking water after years of thirst. It was past noon when the first visitor came. Clara was hanging washing when she saw Mary Henderson climbing the path, her young daughter in tow. Mary was one of the few who still brought Clara sewing work, though always with that furtive, guilty air. "Afternoon, Mary." Clara kept her voice neutral, though her heart had begun to race. "What brings you out?" Mary's eyes darted to where Wyatt was visible through the barn door, working on a broken harness. We heard," she gathered herself. "Is it true? You took in that stranger?" "I offered shelter from the storm, as anyone with Christian decency might." Color rose in Mary's cheeks. "It's not proper. Clara, you know it's not. A woman alone. A woman alone who's been managing 3 years now without the town's concern." Clara couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Where was this worry for propriety when I was hauling my own wood last winter? When my roof leaked and not a soul offered help?" "That's different." "Is it?" Clara stepped closer, and Mary stepped back. "Or is it just that now you have fresh gossip to feast on?" The little girl, Sophie, Clara remembered. She'd made her a dress last Christmas, tugged at her mother's skirts. "Mama, is that a real cowboy?" Wyatt chose that moment to emerge from the barn. He touched his hat politely. "Ladies?" Mary grabbed Sophie's hand. "We should go. Be careful. Clara, people are talking." "People never stop talking." Clara's voice was tired now. "But thank you for the warning." She watched them hurry down the path, saw Mary stop to whisper with Constance Barnes at the bottom of the hill. By evening, everyone would know. The widow Whitmore, who might have pushed her husband off that cliff, had taken up with a drifter. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said behind her. "This is what you meant about risking." "Don't." Clara turned to face him. "Don't apologize for their small minds. Just don't." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. They went back to their work, but the easy peace was fractured now. The town had intruded, as Clara knew it would. More visitors came as word spread. Pastor Dobson hauled his righteous bulk up the hill to warn about the appearance of evil. Clara listened stone-faced to his sermon about proper behavior for widows, then asked sweetly if he'd be willing to help repair her chicken coop since he was so concerned about her welfare. He left in a huff. Thomas Fletcher, who ran the general store, made a special trip to inform Clara that her credit might need to be reassessed given the circumstances. Wyatt stepped out of the barn for that conversation. Didn't say a word. Just stood there cleaning his fingernails with a knife until Fletcher decided he had urgent business elsewhere. But the worst was Margaret Whitmore, James's sister. She arrived like a storm crow, dressed in funeral black despite the 3 years past. "How dare you?" she hissed before Clara could speak. "How dare you disgrace my brother's memory this way? Your brother disgraced himself plenty while living." Clara shot back. "I won't be lectured by you or anyone about his memory." Margaret's face went ugly. "Everyone knows what you did. Everyone knows why he was up on that cliff. And now you parade your sin. Take up with trash." "Careful." Wyatt's voice was soft, but it cut through Margaret's tirade like a blade. He'd appeared silent as smoke, standing just behind Clara. "You'll want to be careful how you speak to Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret sputtered. caught between outrage and the primitive wariness any sane person felt when faced with a man like Wyatt Coulter. He wasn't threatening. Exactly. He just stood there, relaxed, hands loose at his sides. But something in his presence spoke of violence held in check by choice rather than inability. "You'll leave now," he continued in that same soft voice. "And you'll think twice before coming back to spew poison at a woman who showed me kindness. Understood?" Margaret fled. Clara stood trembling in her wake, fury and old pain churning in her gut. "You shouldn't have done that. Someone needed to." "It'll make things worse." "Things were already worse. You just couldn't see it from inside." He moved past her into the house, came back with a cup of water. "Drink." She took it, noted abstractly that her hands were shaking. "They'll run you out of town now." "They'll try." He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time. Won't be the last." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why stay? Why risk it for someone you don't even know?" Wyatt was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his eyes were fixed on the horizon. "You ever been so lonely you forget the sound of your own voice? So long without a kind word that meanness starts to feel normal?" He looked at her then. "Yesterday, you saw a man needing help and offered it. No calculation, no weighing the cost, just simple human decency. You know how rare that is?" Clara's eyes burned. "I'm not some saint, Mr. Coulter. I'm just someone who remembered how to be human when everyone else forgot. That's worth more than you know." That night, she cooked a proper meal, rabbit stew with the last of her preserved vegetables. They ate together at her small table, and if the lamplight made the moment feel intimate, neither acknowledged it. They talked of small things, his travels, her garden, anything but the day's confrontations. When darkness fell complete, Wyatt rose to make his bed by the stove again, but Clara found herself reluctant to retreat to her room. Instead, she brought out her mending and sat in her chair while he settled with one of her grandmother's books, a treatise on herbs that he studied with surprising intensity. "My mother knew plants," he said when he caught her watching. "Used to say God put medicine in the ground for those wise enough to look. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She taught me to read with the Bible and old almanacs. Said a man without learning was only half alive." They lapsed into comfortable quiet. Clara's needle moved in steady rhythm, while Wyatt turned pages with careful fingers. The clock ticked on the mantel. Wind sighed around the corners of the house, but gentle now, without malice. It was the kind of evening Clara had dreamed of in the early days of her marriage, before she learned what James truly was. The kind of simple peace she'd thought forever beyond her reach. And perhaps that was why she let her guard down, why the words slipped out unbidden. "It's nice," she said softly, "having someone here." Wyatt looked up from his book. In the lamplight, his scarred face was transformed, made almost gentle. "It's nice being here." The weight of that admission hung between them. Clara felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she'd revealed some shameful secret. But Wyatt simply smiled and returned to his reading, letting the moment be without pushing for more. Later, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to him shift and settle by the stove, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to name the feeling in her chest. Not hope. She'd learned better than hope, but perhaps its cousin, tentative and fragile as new growth after a killing frost. Tomorrow would bring fresh troubles. The town would escalate their disapproval, she knew. But tonight, with another human presence just beyond her door and the memory of kindness still warm in her chest, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to imagine that surviving might transform into living just for a while. Just for these few days until his horse healed and he rode on. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. Wyatt Coulter had brought something into her house besides trail dust and storm damage. Something that threatened the careful emptiness she'd cultivated, the safety of feeling nothing beyond each day's necessary tasks. It terrified her, it thrilled her, and in the darkness, with brutal honesty. Clara admitted what she'd known from the moment she'd called out to him in the storm. Her ordered world hadn't just shifted, It had begun to crack wide open. The evening started like any other since Wyatt's arrival, quiet, companionable, with the soft scratch of Clara's needle through fabric and the whisper of turning pages. 5 days had passed since the storm. 5 days of shared meals and small kindnesses that had worn grooves in Clara's defenses like water on stone. She should have known it couldn't last. "You never told me," Wyatt said suddenly, setting aside the book he'd been reading. "About your husband. About what happened." Clara's needle stilled. She'd been waiting for this question, dreading it. "There's not much to tell. The town seems to think otherwise. The town thinks many things." She forced herself to resume sewing, though her stitches went crooked, most of them wrong. Wyatt was quiet, but she could feel him watching her, patient as always, giving her space to choose her words or choose silence. It was that patience that undid her, more than pressing would have. "James wasn't—" She stopped, started again. "When I married James Whitmore, I thought I knew him, thought I was lucky. He was handsome, charming, came from a good family. Everyone said what a fine match it was." The needle slipped, pricking her finger. A bead of blood welled up, and she watched it with detached fascination. "Let me—" Wyatt was beside her before she could protest, taking her hand with that same careful gentleness he showed his horse. He wrapped her finger in his handkerchief, applied just enough pressure to stop the bleeding. "It took 3 months," Clara continued, the words coming easier with his hands on hers, something to anchor her. 3 months before he first showed his true nature. I'd burnt the cornbread, such a small thing, but he flew into a rage like I'd never seen, said his mother never burnt cornbread, said I was useless, stupid. Then he backhanded me so hard I saw stars." Wyatt's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on hers. "I thought it was my fault, thought if I was a better wife, more careful." She laughed, bitter as lie. He was careful too, after that, never where it would show, never where the good people of Dust Hollow might see and wonder. And I learned to move quiet, speak soft, anticipate his moods like reading weather. "How long?" Wyatt's voice was rough. 6 years. The words dropped like stones. 6 years of walking on eggshells. 6 years of telling Mary Henderson I was clumsy when she noticed bruises. 6 years of Pastor Dobson preaching about wifely submission while I sat there feeling my ribs ache with each breath. She pulled her hands free, needing distance. The night he died, he was drunk. Drunker than usual. I'd hidden money, just a few dollars squirreled away, thinking maybe someday I could. She shrugged. He found it, went wild, said I was planning to run off, probably had another man. Started hitting me, and this time I thought he wouldn't stop. Clara stood, moved to the window. Outside. Dust Hollow lay quiet under stars sharp as accusations. "I ran, in my nightdress, barefoot, I ran. He came after me, of course, chased me up to Widow's Point. That's what they call that cliff north of town." Fitting, isn't it? She felt rather than heard Wyatt rise. Come to stand behind her, not touching, just present. He was so drunk he could barely stand, kept screaming about teaching me a lesson, about what happened to wives who defied their husbands. He lunged for me and I stepped aside, just stepped aside, and he was going too fast to stop. She pressed her palm against the cool glass. He went over the edge. Took him 3 days to die, they said. Broken on the rocks below, but not dead. Not right away. Clara. They found me up there when the sun rose, still in my nightdress, covered in bruises, half out of my mind. And you know what the first thing Marshall Cooper said to me was? He said, "What did you do to make him chase you?" The laugh that escaped her was wild, edged with old hysteria. Not "are you hurt?" or "what happened?" Just "what did you do?" She turned to face Wyatt then, chin raised, meeting his eyes with defiance born of years of judgment. "So yes, I stepped aside. Yes, I let him fall. And yes, God help me, when they told me he was dead. All I felt was relief. So maybe I am the murderer they whisper about. Maybe I am damned. But I'm alive, and that has to count for something." Wyatt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched the scar on her forehead, the one usually hidden by her hair. His fingers were feather-light, reverent almost. "The only damned one in this story is the man who put this mark on you," he said quietly, "and the town that let him do it." Something broke in Clara then. The tears came sudden and violent, 3 years' worth of grief and rage and guilt pouring out in ugly sobs. Wyatt pulled her against him, and she let him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she cried for the girl who'd believed in love, for the woman who'd endured hell, for all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she was the monster they painted her to be. He held her through it, steady as stone, murmuring words she couldn't make out over her own sobs. His hand stroked her hair, and she could feel his lips press against the crown of her head. Blessing or absolution? She didn't know which. When the storm passed, leaving her empty and oddly clean, Clara realized she was trembling. Wyatt guided her to her chair, disappeared into the kitchen, came back with a cup of water laced with whiskey from the bottle she kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink." She did, the burn in her throat a welcome distraction from the raw feeling in her chest. "I'm sorry. I haven't. Don't apologize." He knelt before her chair, bringing them to eye level. "Don't ever apologize for surviving." Clara searched his face, finding no disgust, no judgment, nothing but a fierce protectiveness that made fresh tears threaten. "The town's right about one thing. I am ruined, broken. I can barely stand to be touched, can't trust, can't. She gestured helplessly. "I'm no good for anyone, Wyatt, especially not someone like you." "Someone like me?" His smile was sad. "You mean a man who lost everything that mattered? Who's been drifting so long he forgot what home felt like until a brave woman offered him shelter from a storm? I'm not brave. You are. Bravest woman I've ever met." He took her hands, held them gentle but firm. "You survived. You got free. You kept your kindness when the world gave you every reason to turn cruel. If that's not courage, I don't know what is." The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, a coyote howled, lonely sound in the vast dark. But inside Clara's small house, in the circle of light and warmth, something shifted between them. Something that had been building since that first night, maybe since that first moment when she'd called out to him through the storm. "Wyatt," she whispered, and he leaned closer, drawn by the way she said his name. I wish. What do you wish?" "I wish I was whole. I wish I could give you what I see in your eyes when you look at me. But I'm terrified. Every time I think about being with someone that way, all I can remember is pain and fear and—" "Shh." He pressed a finger gently to her lips. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. Ever. I'm not him. Clara, I'll never be him." She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. "I know. That's what terrifies me most. You make me want things I thought were dead, make me feel things I swore I'd never feel again. Is that so terrible?" "Yes." The word came out fierce. "Because you'll leave. Your horse is almost healed. You'll ride out and I'll be alone again, and I don't know if I can bear it. Not after this. Not after remembering what it's like to not be alone." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, drew her up with him. "Dance with me." "What?" Clara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "There's no music." "Don't need music." He positioned her hands, one on his shoulder, one in his. "My mother used to say that the best dances happen in silence. When two people move to the same rhythm, only they can hear." Clara wanted to protest, to point out the absurdity of dancing in her small house with a man she'd known less than a week. But Wyatt was already moving, a slow sway that required nothing of her but to follow. Her bad leg protested at first, but he adjusted immediately, taking her weight, letting her lean on him. They danced in the lamplight, two damaged souls finding grace in each other's arms. Wyatt hummed low in his throat, some half-remembered tune that vibrated through his chest into hers. Clara let her head rest against his shoulder, let herself be held, be guided, be safe. I could stay, he said softly, the words rumbling under her ear. If you wanted, I could find work. Even if the town doesn't like it, I'm good with my hands. Can fix most anything. Could help you expand the garden, maybe build a proper workshop for your sewing. Clara's heart stuttered. You'd do that? Give up your wandering for a woman who can barely stand to be touched. He pulled back enough to look at her. You're touching me now. She was. She realized. Her hands gripped him without fear. Her body pressed close to his without the usual panic. I am... That's enough. That's more than enough. He cupped her face with one rough palm. Clara Whitmore, you're worth more than all the ranches in Montana, all the gold in California. If you'll have me, broken parts and all. I'd count myself the luckiest man alive. The kiss came soft as morning light, careful, as if she might spook. Clara had been kissed before, rough, demanding things that took without asking. But Wyatt's lips on hers were a question, a promise, a benediction all at once. She could taste whiskey and sorrow and hope, could feel the way he held himself back, letting her set the pace. When she deepened the kiss, pressing closer, she felt his surprise, then his careful joy. His arms came around her, holding her like she was precious, breakable, worth protecting. And for the first time in 3 years, Clara felt her body respond with something other than fear. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Stay, Clara whispered. Please stay, as long as you'll have me. They stood there swaying slightly, neither willing to break the spell. But eventually, the clock chimed 11, and reality intruded. Tomorrow would come with all its challenges. The town would rage at this new development. There would be consequences, struggles, days when the past rose up to choke them both. But tonight, in the golden circle of lamplight, Clara Whitmore learned that she wasn't as broken as she'd believed, that gentleness could exist without violence, that desire could bloom without fear, that maybe, just maybe, 2 damaged people could build something whole together. I should say good night, she said reluctantly. You should. Neither moved. Finally. Clara laughed, the sound surprised out of her. We're being foolish. The best kind of foolish. But Wyatt stepped back, letting her go. Good night, Clara. Good night, Wyatt. She moved toward her room, paused at the door. Wyatt, what you said about staying, I meant it. Good. She smiled, felt it reach all the way to her eyes. Because I think I'd like to try building something new. With you. His answering smile lit up the room better than any lamp. Clara went to her bed feeling strangely light, as if she'd set down a burden she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its weight. Outside her window, the stars wheeled on in their eternal dance. Tomorrow would come with its trials. But tonight, Clara Whitmore had chosen hope over fear, love over safety, and in choosing, had finally begun to heal. The fever came on sudden as a summer storm. One moment Clara was working in her garden. The next she was on her knees, the world spinning wild around her. The basket of herbs scattered, rosemary and sage mixing with the red dirt as her vision blurred. Clara? Wyatt's voice seemed to come from very far away. Then his arms were around her, lifting her, and she wanted to tell him she was fine. Just needed a moment, but her tongue felt thick and useless. The next hours passed in fragments, the cool press of wet cloth on her burning skin. Wyatt's voice, tight with worry. The bitter taste of her own medicines forced between her lips. She drifted in and out, sometimes knowing where she was, sometimes lost in nightmares where James had found her again, where his hands were around her throat and she couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. No, she thrashed, fighting invisible demons. Please, I'm sorry, I won't. Shh, sweetheart, you're safe. Clara, you're safe. Wyatt's voice cut through the terror, anchored her. She felt his hand smooth her hair, felt the solid warmth of him beside her on the bed. He was holding her, she realized, had been holding her through the worst of it. Wyatt? Her voice came out cracked, barely a whisper. I'm here, not going anywhere. She turned her face into his chest, breathed in the scent of him, leather and soap and something indefinably safe. How long? 2 days. You've been burning up for 2 days. His arms tightened around her. Scared me worse than facing down a grizzly. Did you? She struggled to focus. Did you go for the doctor? A pause. Then, I tried. Bastard wouldn't come. Said you'd made your bed. Now you could lie in it. Fury roughened his voice. Nearly put my fist through his face. Despite everything, Clara smiled weakly. That would have helped my reputation immensely. To hell with your reputation. He pressed his lips to her forehead, checking her temperature. Fever's breaking. Thank God. She dozed again, but peacefully now. When she woke properly, pale morning light filtered through the windows. She was alone in the bed, but she could hear Wyatt moving in the kitchen, the homey clatter of pots and dishes. Clara tried to sit up, gasped as the room tilted. Immediately, Wyatt was there, easing her back against the pillows. Easy, you're weak as a newborn kitten. Flattery will get you nowhere, she managed, but she was grateful for his steadying hands. He'd brought broth, rich and savory. Made it from that old hen that stopped laying. Figured she could do one last service. Clara's stomach clenched with hunger she hadn't realized she felt, but when she reached for the spoon, her hands shook too badly to hold it. Let me... Wyatt settled beside her, careful and patient as he helped her eat. It should have been humiliating, being fed like a child. Instead, it felt like being cherished. I must look a fright, she murmured between spoonfuls. You look alive. That's all that matters. His free hand found hers, squeezed gently. Don't ever scare me like that again. I'll try to schedule my near-death experiences more conveniently next time. He didn't laugh. Clara, when you collapsed, when I couldn't wake you. He set the bowl aside, scrubbed a hand over his face. I've lost too many people, lost my family, my home, everything I built. I can't lose you too, not when I just found you. The raw honesty in his voice undid her. You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die. Promise? I promise. She tugged at his hand until he stretched out beside her, gathered her carefully against him. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at keeping promises. Ask anyone in town. I don't care what anyone in town says. His breath stirred her hair. Never have, never will. They lay quiet, Clara drifting on the edge of sleep. But something nagged at her, pulling her back. Wyatt, when I was fevered, did I say anything? He was quiet too long. You had nightmares. About him. Shame heated her cheeks. I'm sorry you had to... Don't... He turned her face to his, made her meet his eyes. Don't apologize for wounds you didn't ask for. When my sister died, I had nightmares for months. Woke up screaming her name, trying to save her. Pain like that doesn't just disappear because we want it to. Clara studied his face, seeing new lines that hadn't been there days ago. You stayed with me the whole time. Where else would I be? Your horse. Belle's fine. Moved her into the barn proper. Gave her extra grain for being patient. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Though I think she's getting spoiled. Might not want to go back to trail living. Is that so? Clara nestled closer, felt his arms tighten around her. And what about her owner? Is he getting spoiled too? Maybe. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Man could get used to having someone to come home to, someone who looks at him like he's worth something, even when he's not sure himself. You are worth something. Worth everything. They kissed, slow and sweet, and Clara felt that warmth bloom in her chest again. Not desire, not yet. She was too weak for that. But something deeper, more lasting. Something that felt dangerously like forever. A sharp knock shattered the moment. Clara Whitmore! The voice was harsh, official. Open up! Marshall's business! Clara's blood went cold. Wyatt was already moving, settling her back against the pillows before going to the door. She could hear voices, low and tense, but couldn't make out words. When Wyatt returned, his face was granite. Behind him stood Marshall Cooper, hat in hand but eyes hard as flint. 2 deputies flanked him, hands resting on their pistols. "Mrs. Whitmore." Cooper nodded curtly. "Glad to see you're recovered. Marshal?" Clara pulled the blanket higher, acutely aware of her vulnerability. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Had a complaint. Several, actually." Cooper's muddy eyes flicked between her and Wyatt. "About the situation here. Folks are concerned about moral decay. A woman living in sin. We're not—" Clara started hotly, but Wyatt's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "What the lady does in her own home is her business," Wyatt said, voice dangerously quiet. "Unless you have legal cause to be here." Cooper's jaw tightened. "There's also the matter of the night James Whitmore died. Some folks think maybe it's time to revisit that incident, especially given recent developments." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. They could reopen the investigation, could decide she'd murdered James after all. And with Wyatt here, they could paint any picture they wanted. "That case was closed 3 years ago," she managed. "You said yourself there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Evidence can be re-examined. Witnesses can remember things they forgot." Cooper's smile was thin as wire. "Course, might be folks would feel different if certain unsavory elements were to move along. Man like Mr. Coulter here, he must have business elsewhere. You threatening her?" Wyatt's voice had gone soft, which Clara had learned meant danger. "Just observing. Town like this. People talk. Wrong kind of talk can lead to all sorts of unpleasantness." Cooper settled his hat back on his head. "You think on it, Mrs. Whitmore. Think real hard about what kind of life you want to lead. We'll be back in a few days for your answer." They left, but their presence lingered like a bad smell. Clara was shaking, from rage or fear or weakness. She couldn't tell. "They can't do this," she whispered. "They can't just—" "They can." Wyatt sat beside her, pulled her against him. "Question is, what do we do about it?" "We." Clara laughed bitterly. "There is no we in this. Wyatt, they're giving you a way out. You should take it." "Like hell." "I mean it." She pushed away from him, needing distance. "You heard them. They'll charge me with murder if you stay. They'll find witnesses, manufacture evidence. I'll hang, and you'll—" "I'll what? Ride off and leave you to face them alone?" His eyes blazed. "Is that what you think of me? I think you're a good man who doesn't deserve to be dragged into my mess. Your mess." He stood, paced to the window and back. "Clara, I've been running for 2 years, running from grief, from failure, from everything that mattered. Then I found you, and for the first time since I lost everything, I wanted to stop running. You think I'm going to let some tin-star marshal in a town full of hypocrites drive me off? Even if staying means watching me hang? Staying means fighting, means standing up to them instead of letting them win." He knelt beside the bed, took her hands. "We've got 3 days. Old Doc Hartwell, he was your friend's father, right? The one who treated you when I brought you in." Clara nodded slowly. "He knew my mother." "Then we start there, find allies. There have to be others who see through the town's righteousness, others who've been hurt by it. And if there aren't, then we make our own justice." His jaw set stubborn. "Either way, I'm not leaving, not unless you look me in the eye and tell me you want me gone." Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret, found only determination and something fiercer, something that looked like love. "I can't tell you that. God help me, I can't." "Then we fight, together." She wanted to argue more, to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but the fever had left her wrung out, and the safety of his presence was too tempting to refuse. "Together," she agreed softly. But even as Wyatt held her, even as exhaustion pulled her under, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd already lost. The town had tolerated her existence on the margins, but happiness? Love? That was more than Dust Hollow would allow its fallen women. In 3 days, she might be facing a noose. But for now, for these stolen moments, She had Wyatt's arms around her and his promise in her ears. It would have to be enough. It was more than she'd ever thought to have again. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dust Hollow as Wyatt lifted Clara into his arms. She dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, but her legs still trembled from the fever's aftermath. "I can walk," she protested, though her arms wound around his neck. "I know you can." He adjusted his hold, careful of her dignity. "But you shouldn't have to, not today." They'd decided the night before, lying entwined in her narrow bed. If the town wanted to drive them apart, they'd answer with the one thing Dust Hollow couldn't abide: pure, brazen defiance. They would marry. Today. In front of everyone. "The chapel will be locked to us," Clara had warned. "Then we'll marry on the steps, or in the street, or on that hill where I first proposed." Wyatt's jaw had been set with determination. Let them see that their judgment means nothing. That love wins. Now, as he carried her down the path toward town, Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The first person they passed, old Samuel Turner, stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping open. By the time they reached Main Street, a crowd was gathering, drawn by the spectacle like flies to honey. "What in the name of—" Pastor Dobson emerged from the general store, his face purpling. "This is indecent. Put her down at once." Wyatt kept walking, his stride steady and sure. "Morning, Pastor. Fine day for a wedding." "Wedding?" Margaret Whitmore pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with outrage. "You can't be serious. No one will marry you. Not here." "Then we'll speak our vows before God and anyone who cares to witness," Clara said, lifting her chin. "Last I checked, love didn't need your permission. Margaret." The crowd followed as Wyatt carried her to the chapel steps. He set her down gently, keeping an arm around her waist for support. Clara stood as straight as she could, meeting the eyes of her neighbors, these people who'd whispered and judged and turned their backs. "3 years ago," she said, her voice carrying clear across the square, "I became a widow. You all decided then what kind of woman I was. Decided I was guilty without trial, damned without mercy. You left me to struggle alone, to face winter without wood, sickness without aid." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Clara pressed on. "Then this man came to town, a stranger who showed me more kindness in a week than this community has shown in years, and now you threaten us. Try to drive him away because he dares to see me as human, because we dare to find happiness despite your judgment." "You're a disgrace," someone shouted from the back. "Living in sin, flaunting your wickedness." "The only sin here is your hardness of heart," Wyatt said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This woman saved my life, gave me shelter when your Christian town locked its doors. If loving her makes me wicked, then I'll gladly be damned." A new voice spoke from the crowd. Doc Hartwell, pushing forward with his medical bag. "I'll witness your vows." Gasps and mutters greeted this announcement. The doctor was respected, even if considered eccentric. His support meant something. "As will I." Mary Henderson stepped forward, her daughter Sophie clutching her skirts. Her face was pale but determined. "I've held my tongue too long." Clara's only crime was surviving a brutal man. We all knew what James was. We all looked away. "Mary!" Her husband grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" She shook him off. "What I should have done years ago, standing up for what's right." One by one, others began to separate from the crowd. The widow Chen from the laundry, Tom Bradley, the blacksmith's apprentice, young Ruth Morrison, whose baby Clara had helped deliver last winter when the doctor was drunk. Not many, perhaps a dozen souls, but they formed a small circle around Clara and Wyatt. Pastor Dobson's face was near purple. "This is blasphemy. You cannot consecrate a union outside God's house. Then open your doors," old Martha Grayson challenged, leaning heavily on her cane. "If you're so concerned about propriety, Pastor, let them marry properly." "I will not sanctify adultery and murder. Judge not lest ye be judged," Doc Hartwell quoted mildly. "Interesting how selective your scripture becomes when it suits you. Dobson," the pastor spluttered. But the doctor had already turned to Clara and Wyatt. "I'm no preacher, but I've brought life into this world and eased its passing. Reckon that gives me some authority to bless a union. If you'll have me." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "We'd be honored." They joined hands there on the chapel steps, surrounded by their small band of supporters while the rest of the town watched in hostile silence. Doc Hartwell opened his worn Bible, adjusted his spectacles. "Dearly beloved, and I use that term for those who've shown love, not those who've shown judgment. We gather here to witness the joining of Clara Whitmore and Wyatt Coulter, not in a church that would bar them, but under God's own sky, which plays no favorites." Wyatt squeezed Clara's hands, his gray eyes steady on hers. She could feel the tremor in her bad leg but refused to show weakness. Not now. Not when they were making their stand. "Marriage," the doctor continued, "is about more than property or propriety. It's about two people choosing each other despite all obstacles, about building something new from the ashes of what came before. Clara, Wyatt, you've both known loss, both walked through darkness, but you've found light in each other, and that light deserves celebrating, not condemning." "This is a farce," Marshal Cooper announced, shouldering through the crowd. "This woman is under investigation for murder. Any marriage would be invalid. On what evidence?" Doc Hartwell's voice went sharp. "I examined James Whitmore's body myself. Cooper, man was drunk as a lord, injuries consistent with a fall. You closed that case yourself. New evidence has come to light. What evidence?" Wyatt's voice was dangerous soft. "Who's come forward after 3 years of silence? What witness suddenly remembered something convenient?" Cooper's jaw worked. Behind him, Clara could see Margaret Whitmore whispering urgently to someone. They'd manufacture their evidence if they had to, she realized. Truth had never mattered less than the town's need to punish her happiness. "May I continue?" Doc Hartwell asked dryly. "Or shall we turn this wedding into a trial?" When no one else spoke, he nodded. "Wyatt Coulter, do you take this woman as your wife, to honor and cherish, in sickness and health, despite the judgment of small minds and hard hearts?" "I do." Wyatt's voice rang clear. "Today and every day after. Clara Whitmore, do you take this man as your husband, to stand beside him against whatever storms may come, be they from nature or neighbors?" Clara's voice shook, but her words were firm. "I do, with all my heart. Then, by the power vested in me by decades of bringing healing where others brought harm, I pronounce you husband and wife." Doc Hartwell closed his Bible with a snap. "You may kiss your bride, Wyatt, and anyone who objects can take it up with the Almighty." Wyatt cupped Clara's face in his hands, kissed her with a tenderness that made several women in the crowd sigh despite themselves. When they parted, Clara was crying, but they were tears of joy and defiance mixed. "It's not legal," Pastor Dobson protested. "Without proper documentation, I'll file the papers," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Judge Randolph, ancient and austere, making his way forward with his walking stick. "Still a circuit judge? Last I checked, still got the authority to make it legal." Shock rippled through the crowd. Judge Randolph had been retired for years, lived as a hermit on the edge of town. For him to appear now. "Your Honor." Marshal Cooper started, but the judge waved him silent. "Saw James Whitmore backhand this girl once." The judge said conversationally, "In broad daylight, right in front of the mercantile. Not a soul said a word. Not one of you righteous folks stepped in." His rheumy eyes swept the crowd. "Seems to me you forfeited your right to judgment when you chose cowardice over compassion." He pulled out a leather portfolio, began filling out papers with a shaking hand. "Clara Whitmore, Clara Coulter now. Your marriage is legal and binding. Anyone wants to challenge it, they can take it up with the territorial court." The crowd began to disperse, some muttering darkly, others looking thoughtful. Marshal Cooper lingered, his face thunderous. "This isn't over," he warned. "Yes, it is." Wyatt's arm tightened around Clara. "We're married legal. We'll live quiet, cause no trouble. But if you come for her, if you try to manufacture some case against my wife, you'll find I'm not the forgiving sort." Something in his eyes made the marshal step back. Cooper might wear a badge, but Wyatt had the look of a man who'd faced down worse than small-town law. After the marshal left, their small group of supporters gathered closer. Mary Henderson was crying, Sophie patting her skirts in confusion. Tom Bradley offered his congratulations with a shy smile. Even the widow Chen, who spoke little English, pressed a small silk handkerchief into Clara's hands. A wedding gift. "Never thought I'd see the day," Martha Grayson said, leaning on her cane. "This town's been sick with its own righteousness for too long. Maybe this is the medicine it needs. Or maybe they'll run us all out," Mary said, but she was smiling through her tears. Worth it, though, to do one right thing. As the sun climbed higher, the wedding party made its unlikely way back to Clara's house. She could walk now, the joy giving her strength, but Wyatt kept his arm around her just the same. Behind them, their supporters followed, a ragtag bunch of outcasts and quiet rebels who'd finally found their voices. At the house, Clara served what food she had, simple fare, but served with glad heart. Doc Hartwell produced a bottle of whiskey, for medicinal purposes, and even the widow Chen laughed at that. They toasted the new couple, toasted courage, toasted the possibility of change even in a place as set in its ways as Dust Hollow. "What will you do now?" Mary asked as the afternoon wore on. "The town won't forget this. They'll make your lives miserable. We'll live," Clara said simply. "We'll work, tend our garden, help those who need it, same as before, except now we'll do it together." "And if they come for you again?" Wyatt and Clara exchanged glances. "Then we'll face that together too," Wyatt said. "But today, we won. Today, love won," as their guests departed with the setting sun, each carrying a little more courage than they'd come with. Clara stood on her porch watching the town below. Lights were beginning to flicker in windows, families settling in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges. She knew. The town's judgment hadn't disappeared. It had only been momentarily defied. But tonight, she was Clara Coulter. Tonight, she had a husband who'd stood before the whole town and claimed her, scars and all. Tonight, she'd discovered that, even in a place as hard as Dust Hollow, there were still those willing to stand for what was right. "No regrets?" Wyatt asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "None?" She leaned back against him, feeling his solid warmth. "You? Only that I didn't carry you farther. Should have carried you clean through town and back, just to see Dobson's face turn a darker shade of purple." Clara laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "There's always tomorrow." "That there is, Mrs. Coulter, that there is." They stood together as stars began to peek through the darkening sky. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds. The town might hate them for it, but they'd learned something important today. Hate was loud, but love, when it stood up to be counted, was louder. And in the end, love was all that mattered. The smell of smoke woke Clara from restless sleep. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, caught in one of those nightmares where the past bled into the present. Then Wyatt was shaking her shoulder, his voice urgent. "Fire! Someone set fire to the barn!" They stumbled outside to find orange flames licking at the old structure. Belle's frightened whinnying cut through the crackle of burning wood. Wyatt didn't hesitate, plunging into the smoke-filled barn while Clara ran for buckets. "Wyatt!" She could barely see him through the smoke, heard Belle's hooves striking wood as he fought to free her. The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be accidental. The smell of kerosene hung thick in the air. He emerged choking, leading Belle, who danced and pulled against the rope. Black soot covered his face, and a burn marked his forearm where a falling timber had caught him. "Let me see." Clara reached for his arm, but he shook his head. "Later. We need to save what we can." They worked desperately, throwing bucket after bucket of water from the well, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with their bare hands. The barn was old, dry as kindling. Within minutes, it was fully engulfed. Clara's eyes stung from smoke and unshed tears as she watched months of hay, tools, all their carefully hoarded supplies go up in flames, But worse than the loss was the knowledge of what this meant. Someone had come in the night, crept onto their property, done this deliberately. Look, Wyatt pointed to the ground near where the fire had started. Boot prints in the dust. And something else, a piece of fabric caught on a nail. Blue wool, like the kind favored by Henry Whitmore, James's brother. He said he'd make us pay. Clara whispered. At the wedding. Said I'd gotten away with murder long enough. Wyatt's face was grim. We need the marshal. The marshal who threatened me, who made it clear whose side he's on. Clara laughed bitterly. No, Wyatt, this is the town's answer to our defiance. This is what fighting back looks like. They stood watching as the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, their neighbor's message written in flame and ash. No one came to help. No one raised an alarm. The town slept on, or pretended to. By dawn, only smoking ruins remained. Clara sat on the porch steps, exhausted and heartsick. While Wyatt tended Belle's singed mane, the horse was skittish but unharmed. A small mercy in a merciless night. We should leave, Clara said quietly. Take what we can salvage and go. You were right about finding somewhere new. No! Wyatt's voice was sharp as the crack of a whip. That's what they want. Drive us out. Prove they were right about us all along. They burned our barn. Wyatt. What's next? The house? What if we're inside when... He knelt before her, took her soot-stained hands in his. Then we rebuild. We post watches. We fight back smart instead of scared. With what? We barely had enough to get through winter as it was. Now with the barn gone, the feed destroyed. I've got money saved. Not much, but enough to rebuild. And Tom Bradley, he offered to help. Said he was tired of the town's bullying. Clara wanted to hope, but hope felt dangerous. They'll come again. Henry won't stop. The town won't stop. Not until... A rider appeared on the road, moving fast. Clara tensed, but relaxed marginally when she recognized Doc Hartwell. The old physician dismounted with more agility than his years suggested, his face grave. Heard about the fire, he said without preamble. Also heard Henry Whitmore was buying drinks at the saloon last night, bragging about how justice was finally coming for the wicked. Can you testify to that? Wyatt asked. Could, but it won't matter if Cooper won't arrest him. The doctor studied the ruins. This isn't going to stop. You know, Henry's got backing, Margaret's money, the pastor's influence. They mean to run you out or see you dead. Then what do you suggest? Clara asked tiredly. Because I'm running low on fight. Doc Hartwell was quiet for a moment. Then, you know why I came back to Dust Hollow after my training back east? This was my wife's town. She loved it, saw its potential, died believing it could be better. He met Clara's eyes. Your mother believed the same. Spent her life trying to heal this place's sickness. Maybe it's time someone finished what they started. How? By not standing alone. The doctor straightened. You've got more support than you know. Mary Henderson's been talking to the other women. Tom Bradley's been working on the younger men. Even Judge Randolph's been making noise about circuit court investigations into local corruption. That's a dozen people against hundreds. Every avalanche starts with a single stone. He pulled out a flask, took a sip, offered it to them. Besides, you've already done the hardest part. You've shown them defiance is possible. Now we build on that. Over the next days, help came in unexpected ways. Tom Bradley showed up with lumber surplus from a job. The widow Chen brought food, pressing it into Clara's hands with a stream of Chinese that somehow conveyed both sympathy and determination. Young Ruth Morrison arrived with her baby in a fierce expression, offering to help watch the property at night. They whisper about me too, she said simply. No husband, but a baby. At least you had a wedding ring. They worked to clear the debris and begin rebuilding. Wyatt and Tom hauled beams while Clara and the women sorted through what could be salvaged. It was back-breaking work, but there was something healing in it too. The shared labor. The gradual rise of new walls where destruction had been. On the third day, Henry Whitmore came. Clara saw him first, riding up bold as brass with 2 hired men. Her hands tightened on the hammer she'd been using. Wyatt, He turned, saw the riders, and very deliberately set down his tools. "Stay back," he told her quietly. "Like hell." They faced the three men together. Henry's red-rimmed eyes swept over the construction, his mouth twisting. "Building again? Slow learners, aren't you?" "We learned fine," Wyatt said evenly. "Learned you're a coward who comes in darkness. Learned you're too weak to face us direct." Henry's face flushed. "You got no proof. Got your fabric on our nail. Got witnesses to your drinking talk." Wyatt smiled cold. "Got a judge who's mighty interested in prosecuting arson?" "You think that broken-down old fool scares me? You think any of them?" Henry gestured dismissively at Tom and the women. "Matter a damn. This is our town. White people's town. Good people's town." "Murderer's town? You mean?" Clara said, stepping forward. "Just like your brother. He beat me for 6 years while you all watched. Now you want to finish what he started? James was a good man until you poisoned him against us. Turned him weak. Made him what? Violent, drunk?" Clara laughed harsh. "He was those things when I married him. You all knew it. His mother knew it. But better to sacrifice a young girl than admit the golden son was rotten." Henry's hand moved toward the gun on his hip. Instantly, Wyatt was between them, and something in his stance made Henry freeze. "Draw it," Wyatt said softly. "Please, give me the excuse." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then one of Henry's hired men spoke up. "This ain't what you paid us for, Whitmore." "We ain't killing nobody in broad daylight." Henry's face contorted. "You're all gonna regret this. Every last one of you. This town won't stomach—" "This town's changing," Doc Hartwell said, appearing from behind the new framing. With him were others, Mary Henderson and her husband, Judge Randolph leaning on his stick, even a few faces Clara didn't recognize. Maybe slower than it should, but changing nonetheless. "And you're gonna help it?" Henry spat. "You bleeding hearts think you can take what's ours? Nothing's yours that wasn't built on others' backs." The judge said mildly, "Your family got rich on fear and favors, but fear fades when people stand together." Henry looked around, perhaps seeing for the first time that his audience wasn't as sympathetic as he'd expected. Several townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Not all were friendly to Clara's cause, but neither were they cheering Henry on. "This isn't over," he snarled finally. "You can't watch forever." "Can't protect her forever." "Don't have to," Wyatt said. "Just have to outlast cowards like you." Henry wheeled his horse around and galloped off, his hired men following with evident relief. The gathered crowd began to disperse, but not before Clara caught several thoughtful looks, heard murmured conversations that didn't sound entirely hostile. "He'll be back," she said quietly to Wyatt. "Let him come." He pulled her close, heedless of their audience. Each time he shows his true face, more people see what kind of man he really is. That night, they posted watches. Tom Bradley took the first shift, then Ruth, then Doc Hartwell, who claimed his old bones didn't need much sleep anyway. Clara lay in Wyatt's arms, listening to the night sounds, waiting for trouble that didn't come. "Maybe we did it," she whispered. "Maybe standing up to him?" "Maybe," Wyatt agreed. "Or maybe he's planning something worse. But for now, they were safe. The barn walls were rising. They had allies, few but fierce, and most importantly, they had each other. "I love you," Clara said into the darkness. She'd thought the words before, but never spoken them, too afraid of jinxing what they had. Wyatt's arms tightened around her. "And I love you. Clara Coulter, come hell or Henry Whitmore." She laughed softly at that. And if tears mixed with the laughter, well, that was fitting too. They'd won another day, pushed back the darkness a little further. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight they could rest in their small victory. Outside, Doc Hartwell walked the perimeter, humming an old hymn under his breath. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. But below them, in a small house on the edge of a changing town, two people held each other and dared to believe in tomorrow. The war for Dust Hollow's soul was far from over, but for the first time in years, the outcome was no longer certain. Winter came early to Dust Hollow that year, bringing with it a bitter cold that seemed to seep into the bones of the town itself. Clara woke to frost patterns on the windows and Wyatt's side of the bed empty and cold. She found him outside, chopping wood in the pre-dawn darkness, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "You'll catch your death," she called, pulling her shawl tighter. He paused, axe resting on his shoulder. "Better than letting you freeze. Storm's coming. Can smell it on the wind." She knew he was right. The sky had that heavy, waiting quality that promised snow. They'd rebuilt the barn, patched the house, laid in what supplies they could afford. But winter in Dust Hollow was merciless, even in good years. And this had been far from a good year. "I'll help," she said, moving toward the wood pile. "Clara, don't." She picked up an armload of split logs. "We're partners, remember? In everything." They worked in companionable silence, racing the coming storm. By full light, snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes. By noon, the world had disappeared behind a white curtain. "At least Henry can't burn anything in this weather," Clara said, trying for levity as they huddled by the stove. Wyatt didn't smile. He'd been quiet all morning, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of worry. "We're low on food. What we've got might last 2 weeks if we're careful. This storm could go on for days. We'll manage. We always do. You shouldn't have to just manage. You should have—" He broke off, jaw tight. "What, a big house in town? Servants? All the things a proper wife has?" Clara moved to him, cupped his scarred face. "I have you. That's worth more than all the rest." He caught her hands, pressed them to his lips. "I wanted to give you better, wanted to prove to them all that—" "Shh." She kissed him soft, silencing his doubts. "We're alive. We're together. We're free. That's better than I ever dreamed." The storm raged for 3 days. They rationed their food, kept the fire low to save wood, and found warmth in each other's arms. Clara taught Wyatt to sew, laughing at his clumsy fingers. He told her stories of his childhood in Montana, of mountains that scraped the sky and valleys green as Eden. On the 4th day, the snow stopped. They ventured out to find a world transformed, white and pristine and deadly cold. Wyatt set off to check on Belle and survey the damage while Clara attempted to clear a path to the well. She was struggling with a frozen pump handle when she heard the shot. The sound cracked across the snow-muffled landscape, sharp and wrong. Clara's heart stopped. "Wyatt!" No answer. She ran, floundering through knee-deep drifts, toward the barn. "Wyatt!" She found him on the ground, red blooming across the snow beneath him. His face was white with shock. One hand pressed to his side, standing over him, rifle still smoking, was Henry Whitmore. "Thought the storm would keep me away?" Henry's eyes were wild, face gaunt with obsession. "Thought you'd won." Clara dropped to her knees beside Wyatt, pressing her hands over his, trying to staunch the bleeding. "So much blood. Too much. You shot him. In cold blood. Even Cooper can't ignore. Cooper's snowed in like everyone else. By the time anyone finds you, it'll be too late." Henry lifted the rifle again. "Should have done this months ago. Should have finished what James started." Clara's mind raced. The nearest neighbor was a mile away. Doc Hartwell further still. Wyatt was losing blood fast, his breathing shallow. She had to do something. Had to— "Go ahead," she said, lifting her chin. "Shoot me, but know this. You'll hang for it. Not even your sister's money can save you from murdering 2 people. Henry hesitated, and in that moment, Clara acted. She grabbed a handful of snow and flung it at his face, then lunged for the rifle. They struggled, her bad legs screaming protest, but desperation gave her strength. The gun went off, the shot going wild, and then she had the rifle, was swinging it like a club. It connected with Henry's temple and he went down, groaning. Clara didn't wait to see if he'd get up. She dropped the rifle and turned back to Wyatt. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing harder on the wound. "Don't you dare leave me. Not now. Not like this." His eyes fluttered open, focused on her with effort. "Clara, Save your strength. I'm going to get you inside. Get you patched up. You're going to be fine." The words poured out, desperate promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Somehow, she got him to the house. It took everything she had, dragging him through the snow, her bad leg buckling with every step. By the time she got him onto the bed, they were both soaked with snow and blood. Clara's grandmother's teachings came flooding back. Stop the bleeding. Clean the wound. Prevent fever. Her hands moved without conscious thought, cutting away his shirt, packing the wound with clean cloth. The bullet had gone through his side. Good. No need to dig it out. But it had torn things, bled too much. Need to tell you. Wyatt's voice was weak. Later. You can tell me later when you're well. She mixed medicines with shaking hands. Willow bark for pain. Yarrow to stop bleeding. Drink this. He managed a few swallows before his head fell back. His skin was going gray, breathing too fast. Shock. She piled blankets on him, stoked the fire high, but knew it might not be enough. "Please," she whispered, not sure who she was begging. "Please don't take him, not when I just learned how to live again." Through the window, she could see Henry's form in the snow. He was moving, trying to crawl away. "Let him," she thought viciously. Let him crawl all the way to town and explain how he came to have a head wound while Wyatt Coulter lay shot. The next hours blurred together. Clara changed bandages, forced medicine between Wyatt's lips, talked to him constantly about their future, about the children they might have, about the garden she'd plant come spring. Anything to keep him anchored to life. When his fever spiked, she bathed him with snow-cooled water. When he thrashed in delirium, she held him down, terrified he'd tear the wound worse. When he called for his dead sister, she wept but didn't stop working. Darkness fell. The storm had passed, but the cold remained brutal. Clara knew she should try to get help, but couldn't leave Wyatt. He was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong moment, and she'd lose him. Near midnight, his breathing changed, went shallow, rattling. Clara pressed her ear to his chest, heard the struggle in his lungs, blood in the lungs. Her grandmother's voice whispered, "When that happens." "No." She hauled him upright, propped him against her. "Breathe, damn you, breathe." He coughed, specking her dress with blood. But he breathed, ragged and wet, but breathing. She held him there, taking his weight, feeling every labored inhale and exhale. That's how Tom Bradley found them at dawn. Clara holding Wyatt upright, both of them covered in blood. Her voice hoarse from talking him through the night. Jesus Christ. Tom took in the scene. Henry's rifle on the floor. "I'll get Doc. Hurry." Clara said simply. There was nothing left in her but that one word. Tom ran. Later. Clara would learn he'd made that mile to town in record time. Had practically dragged Doc Hartwell from his bed. But in the moment, she only knew the endless struggle to keep Wyatt breathing. The weight of him in her arms. The prayer on her lips. When Doc Hartwell arrived, he took one look and went to work. "You did good, girl. Probably saved his life. Now let me—" "I'm not leaving him. Didn't say you had to. Just give me room." The doctor worked with swift efficiency, checking the wound, listening to Wyatt's chest. His face was grave, but not hopeless. "Bullet missed the vital organs, but there's damage. Broken ribs, torn muscle, and yes, some blood in the lungs. He's lucky you kept him upright. Will he live? If infection doesn't set in, if his lungs clear, if he's as stubborn as the woman who loves him." Doc Hartwell met her eyes. "He's got a chance. That's more than he would have had without you." The next days were a blur. News of the shooting spread despite the snow. Marshal Cooper came, took one look at Wyatt fighting for his life, and actually did his job for once. Henry was arrested, though his sister screamed about injustice. Found him half frozen, ranting about finishing God's work. Cooper told Clara, even his hired men won't stand by him now, shooting a man in cold blood. There are lines even Dust Hollow won't cross. Others came too, Mary Henderson with food, Ruth with firewood, the widow Chen with some herbal concoction that she insisted Clara add to Wyatt's medicines. Even some who'd been hostile before. shaken by how close Henry had come to murder. "We were wrong," Martha Grayson said simply. "Let hate blind us to what was right. Won't make that mistake again." But Clara barely heard any of it. Her world had shrunk to the bed where Wyatt fought his battle, to the rise and fall of his chest, the fever that came and went like tides. On the 7th day, he opened his eyes clear for the first time. "Clara?" His voice was a rasp, but it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "I'm here." She gripped his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here. Did we win?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes, my love. We won." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Good. Would hate to miss our first spring." Spring. He was thinking of spring, of future, of life beyond this room. Clara bent and kissed him gentle, tasting tears and hope. "You're going to see 1,000 springs," she promised. "We both are." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, setting the snow-covered world ablaze with light. It felt like a benediction, a promise that even the harshest winter must yield to warmth eventually. Clara had learned to walk through grief and fear. Now, finally, she could learn to walk in joy. 10 years had passed since the winter Henry Whitmore tried to kill love with a rifle shot. The girl who had once kept Clara's diary, Sophie Henderson, now a young woman of 18, sat in the small schoolhouse, reading aloud to a circle of children. "Love is walking when you cannot." Sophie read, her voice clear and strong. "Love is being carried when you fall. Love is looking at each other in silence and understanding a whole lifetime." The children listened with rapt attention, some too young to fully grasp the weight of the words, others old enough to understand they were hearing something precious, the true story of their town's transformation. Dust Hollow had changed. Oh, it was still a hard place. Still fought the desert for every drop of water and blade of grass. But something fundamental had shifted that winter a decade ago. The town that had once thrived on judgment had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, the harder lesson of mercy. Sophie closed the worn diary, ran her fingers over the faded ink. "Mrs. Coulter wrote those words just before she passed. She wanted us to remember, to never forget what happens when fear rules instead of love." "Did you know her, Miss Sophie?" little Benjamin Chen asked, his mother's features soft in his young face. "I did. She made me a dress when I was just about your age, taught me that kindness doesn't need words, just actions." Through the schoolhouse window, Sophie could see the cemetery on the hill. 2 headstones stood side by side there now, one newer than the other, but both weathered by desert wind. Clara Coulter had lived 5 more years after that terrible winter, long enough to see Dust Hollow truly change, to help birth a dozen babies with her healing hands, to love and be loved without shame. The consumption had taken her in the end, her lungs never quite recovering from that night she'd held Wyatt upright for hours. But she'd faced even that with grace, more concerned about Wyatt's grief than her own pain. "Will you tell us about Mr. Coulter?" another child asked. "Is it true he still brings flowers every day?" Sophie smiled. "Why don't we ask him? He should be along any minute for his afternoon visit." As if summoned, the schoolhouse door opened. Wyatt Coulter entered, older now, his dark hair gone silver. The scar on his face faded to a thin white line. He moved carefully. The old bullet wound troubled him on cold days, but his eyes were still sharp as winter stars. "Miss Henderson." He touched his hat. "Children. Mr. Coulter." The children surrounded him, as they always did. He'd become a fixture in their lives, the quiet man who fixed their toys, taught the boys to gentle horses, showed the girls they could be just as strong as anyone. "We were reading Mrs. Clara's diary," Benjamin piped up, "about love and walking and being carried." Something soft passed over Wyatt's weathered face. "Were you now? And what did you learn?" "That love wins," a girl named Faith declared with the certainty of childhood, "even when people are mean and try to stop it." "That's right." Wyatt settled onto one of the small benches, his long legs folding awkwardly. "Love wins, but not easy. and not without cost. Your Mrs. Clara, she taught me that. Taught this whole town. Really? Tell us about the wedding, Sophie urged. The children loved that story. Wyatt chuckled, the sound rusty but warm. Which one? The one on the church steps, or the real one we had later? Both, the children chorused. So he told them, his gravelly voice painting pictures of defiance and devotion, of a woman who couldn't walk to the altar and a man who wouldn't let that stop them, of a town forced to confront its own cruelty, of love that bloomed in the harshest ground. But the second wedding, he said, eyes distant with memory. That was something else. Judge Randolph insisted on doing it proper once Henry was locked away. Had it right in the church, with the doors wide open. Pastor Dobson had left town by then, couldn't stomach the changes coming. The new minister, Reverend Garcia, he said God's house should never have been closed to love in the first place. Was Mrs. Clara beautiful? Faith asked. Beautiful as sunrise after the longest night. She wore her mother's wedding dress. Mary Henderson had kept it safe all those years. And when it came time to walk down that aisle, Wyatt paused, lost in the moment. Her leg was painting her something fierce that day. So I did what any man would do for the woman he loved. You carried her, Benjamin breathed. I carried her, from the church doors all the way to the altar. And this time, instead of staring in judgment, people stood, whole congregation on their feet, some crying, some cheering. Doc Hartwell, God rest him. He said it was like watching the town's heart unfreeze. Sophie wiped at her eyes. She'd been there, a child of 8, watching from her mother's arms. The image was burned into her memory. Wyatt in his best suit, Clara in white lace, her arms around his neck, both of them crying and laughing at once. The whole church holding its breath, then exhaling in joy. After that, Wyatt continued. Things were different, not perfect, perfection's not for this world, but better. Clara opened a proper clinic, taught other women the healing arts. I worked the land, helped newcomers settle. We built something good together. Did you have children? One of the younger ones asked innocently. A shadow crossed Wyatt's face. No, the good Lord didn't see fit to bless us that way. But Clara always said you were all her children. Every baby she delivered, every child she healed, every young woman she taught to read and cipher. Her love didn't need blood to make family. He stood, joints protesting. Now then, I've got a stop to make before the sun sets. You children mind Miss Sophie. They knew where he was going, same place he went every day at sunset. Sophie walked him to the door. Thank you, she said quietly, for keeping her memory alive. She lives as long as we remember, Wyatt replied, as long as this town remembers what it cost to choose love over fear. Sophie watched him make his way up the hill to the cemetery, a small bunch of wildflowers in his hand. He'd sit there until full dark, talking to Clara as if she could hear him. Maybe she could, in a place like Dust Hollow, where the veil between worlds wore thin. Anything seemed possible. The children had scattered to their homes by the time Sophie locked up the schoolhouse. She stood for a moment in the gathering dusk, looking out over the town. New buildings had sprung up, a proper doctor's office, a library, homes for the diverse families that had found welcome here. The old Dust Hollow, built on exclusion and judgment, had died with its prejudices. The new one wasn't perfect, but it was trying. She opened Clara's diary one more time, reading the last entry by lamplight. Wyatt asked me today if I had any regrets. I told him yes. I regret the years I spent afraid to love, afraid to trust, afraid to believe I deserved happiness. But perhaps we needed those years of fear to truly appreciate the love when it came. Perhaps Dust Hollow needed its darkness to recognize the light. I am dying. This I know. But I am not afraid. I have been loved by a good man. I have loved in return. I have seen hardness turn to kindness, judgment transformed to justice. What more could anyone ask of one small life? To those who come after, remember this: love is not weak. Love is the strongest force in this world. It can carry you when you cannot walk. It can lift entire towns from the dust of their own making. But you must choose it, again and again, especially when it's hard, especially when the whole world tells you no. Choose love. Always choose love. Sophie closed the diary, pressed it to her chest. Tomorrow, she would read more to the children. She would tell them about the school Clara founded, the women she trained, the lives she saved. She would tell them about Wyatt's unwavering devotion, the way he'd spent these last years ensuring Clara's work continued. But tonight, she would go home to her own husband, would hold her own children close, and would whisper a prayer of gratitude for the widow who couldn't walk to the altar and the cowboy who carried her. Up on the hill, silhouetted against the dying light, an old man sat beside a headstone, his hand resting on the earth as if he could still feel the heartbeat of the woman below. The stars began to appear, same stars that had witnessed their first dance, their first kiss, their defiant love. "See you tomorrow, sweetheart," Wyatt murmured, struggling to his feet. Same as always. He walked back down the hill, slow but steady, carrying her memory like she'd once carried his heart, carefully, reverently, eternally. In the schoolhouse, Sophie had left one lamp burning. Its light spilled out into the darkness, a beacon for anyone who needed reminding that love wins, not easily, not without scars, but ultimately and always, love wins. Thank you for listening to this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts about Clara and Wyatt's journey. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your reflections in the comments below. Let's connect over these tales that remind us that love truly conquers all, even in the harshest of times and places.